The next parable we want to look at is the parable of the dishonest manager found in Luke 16, 1 through 9. Then Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do, now that my master is taking the position away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do, so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So summoning his master's debtors, one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked another, 'How much do you owe?' He replied, 100 containers of wheat. He said to him, 'Take your bill, and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much, and whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will extend to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." This parable has caused no shortage of grief to modern readers. The greatest challenge for most modern readers is that Jesus apparently commends this manager for his dishonest actions. There are a couple of important things to note here. The manager is called to account in verse 2. "Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer." We are not given the reason for his bad management, and that's probably not really important anyhow. The manager quickly cuts a deal with all his debtors. It's important for us to understand that by cutting a deal with the debtors, the manager is not necessarily shortchanging the owner, because the manager is commended by the owner. There are several possible options here, but the two that seem most likely are similar. The first option is that the manager is simply eliminating his own paycheck. It's possible he was receiving some sort of commission from the owner, and thus he simply eliminated his commission. It's also possible that he was doing a little business on the side, maybe adding a little bit to the deal, and by eliminating what he had added, he gives the debtors relief from their bills. The manager could have called in the debts, but he still would be unemployed. By eliminating his own paycheck, he set himself up in good stead with the people who owed the manager money. He was essentially creating connections for himself after this. He took a huge risk, and his freedom to release his money reflects an attitude toward wealth that is positive. This is reflective of the saying of Jesus, "Consider the lilies of the field." So the manager's actions are commended by Jesus. The point made to the disciples is that faithfulness with money is an indication of faithfulness to God. One other thing to consider in this parable is that Jesus says, make friends with dishonest wealth, or some versions say unrighteous mammon. What does he mean by this? What is unrighteous mammon, and what does Jesus mean by make friends with it? The word mammon is simply a word for wealth. But what does it mean to call it unrighteous wealth? Well, the average person in the first century did not actually use coinage to a great extent. Much of the economy was done through the barter system. Coins were used, however, for taxes and sometimes for payment. And most of the coinage, or much of the coinage, had a figure of the emperor on it, for example, and would have been considered idolatrous to the average Jewish person. So in that regard, the coinage itself could have been seen as unrighteous. So Jesus here is telling these disciples that they need to learn how to make friends with this unrighteous wealth, because it will be useful someday. Jesus also says you can't serve God and money, and this is simply no different than what we saw in the Old Testament. Money in the Old Testament, by and large, is seen as very positive, but it can become an idol. And so serving money can become an idolatrous situation as well. You cannot serve both God and money. Money in and of itself is not evil, but it can become an idol.